Check. Good afternoon, everybody. How y'all feeling today? Yep. My name is Ruby Ibarra. Please give it up for my DJ ET. Hey. Let's go, yo. Yep. No need for introduction, you hear and you know why. No dive into an era with the beats of lo-fi. Put my face in the book as my people are profile. Erased from the books and my people are told lies. Has a limit, go fly, Cali, here we go high. I mean back in 05, but in you I grow wise. Surprise we grow wise, double dose of broke lies. We go with those guys and losing, no pick goes by. I got Bam to my left and Erica right. Here they giving you America like Erica right. Try to take my title, never want to inherit the rights. Got Global City's finest, put me on the fight list. Color of the lines, cause I color like your iris. Hunger in my eyes, this is everything that I risk. Kill it with my time, every time it's better free. But the work is never done, and believe I'll never leave, cause I'm here. Yeah, so get your hands in the air. Hey, cause now the greatest is here. Hey, and I'ma make this my year. Yeah, cause I'm finally here. Yeah, I'm finally here. Hey, yeah, we finally here. Yeah, we finally here. Yeah. You call yourself a rapper, talk less and take notes. We slay sheep, respect those who crazy, but next up. Decrease the flex stuff and nasties, the bless those. Decrease the catch up, we say peace, but stay broke. If you catch phase, to the point I catch praise. Rhymes turn to catchphrase, till it starts to cascade. Product of Mac Dre, Wu-Tang, and Andre. We preach on beat, takes a quick neck to press play. They say we from the slums where the heroes never won. Some people always sung brown faces to the sun, so the say it one more time. If it's spinning from the stations, I'm rotating around the sun. The axe is my mattress, I pass out. Past this, abstract the masses, lash up the practice, back to back raps, Manila noir, bar for bar, homie take the repertoire, bar with the bars to subpar, well let's up the bar. Cause I'm finally here, yeah, so get your hands in the air, yeah, cause now the greatest is here, hey, and I'ma make this my year, yeah, cause we finally here, in Vegas, yeah, we finally here, Las Vegas, yeah, we finally here, yeah, we finally here, yeah, cause I'm finally here, get your hands in the air, cause now the greatest is here, and I'ma make this my year, cause I'm finally here. Yeah, I'm finally here. Yeah, I'm finally here. And I ain't going nowhere. Hey. Good afternoon, everybody. National Immigrant Integration Conference 2021. Please make some noise for yourselves for being here. Like I said, we're all here today. So for those of you who've never heard of me before, my name is Ruby Ibarra. I'm here with my DJ ET. We come from the Bay Area, California. Anybody here from California? But we're also from the Philippines. And the brief performance I would like to share with you all this afternoon as you all are enjoying your lunch is from my debut album called Circa 91, which I wrote from my perspective and my experience and journey as a 1.5 generation Filipino American. My family and I, we were born in the Philippines. We traveled to the US in the 90s. And I remember growing up, I just never, found stories or heard stories that were similar to mine in the media that I consumed and the books that I read. I always wondered how come when I was first starting to learn how to read, like none of the characters in these books ever had names that were similar to my cousins, ever had experiences that were similar to mine. And so what I wanted to do with my art was to create and document my story, especially the stories of my parents. As we all know, it's 2021 and we're still very limited in seeing ourselves represented in books, talked about in our history. So I think it's important for me, especially as an artist, to make sure that if they're not gonna write my story, that I'm gonna write my story and I'm gonna own my story. And hopefully you all are enjoying this conference and also feel validated, feel empowered, feel confident in knowing that your voice matters, your story matters, you're valid, and we need to hear what you have to say. So thank you all for supporting this conference again. And once again, my name is Ruby Ybarra. This next track is called Someday. Immigrant people, make some noise. I wrote this album because I want my life to change. Tired of being shortchanged, trying to remain sane. Hopped off the plane, didn't stop all the pain. My father's still in debt and we've been struggling to pay for a bedroom up on Cleveland Ave. Preacher for just eating half, hands tied against the odds. How you gonna even that? People from the slums once, now live in the humdrum. Mama from the barrio, so we dreaming we can stunt once. Mama, I know it's gonna be fine wherever we go, cause we know you race for the dream and be a hero. It's an ego to an eagle. I free flow in a sweet note. My pipe dreams throw people. My skin so Filipino. Oftentimes my pride inside is fighting high tides. Here we walk the ocean with the day you'll learn to know stop. Closed eyes, fingerprint ink with the most hot. Ghost times, mama never blinked, say the old twice. I said, mama, we gon' make it there someday. I said, mama, we gon' make it there someday. I said, mama, we gon' make it there someday. I said, mama, we gon' make it there someday. I said, mama, we gon' make it here. 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 Freestyle to me, I've been doing this as 6-year-old. Thinking on my own 2 feet, survival, take and go. Pick a role, you could be the swimmer or a second soul. I was a 6-year-old without a father, 6-year-old with 7 spoons and dinner rolls. So where you go, where you go, pretend to sing like Figaro. My people still invisible. When you the spitting image of a person that you hate, extensive spitting images of God that never breaks. Nirvana never waits, I was a pawn of bitter fate. The spawn from inner hate, I never wanted to be great. I study my mother, wonder how she holds his family. That minimum salary stretched as much as it can be. Stress but keeps it from me. I'm just trying to fit and see it. Pray for that acceptance. Like it validates my sanity. I wrestle with affirmations, settle for masking faces. After all the stolen lands are always greener places. I said, mama, we gon' make it there someday. I said, mama, we gon' make it there someday. I said, mama, we gon' make it there someday. I said, mama, we gon' make it there someday. I said, mama, we gon' make it here. I said, mama, I'ma make it here. I said, mama, I'ma make it here. I said, mama, yeah, I made it here today. This next track is called The Other Side. Okay. The grass greener on the other side. Forget your dreams as you time to ride. The grass greener on the other side. Forget your dreams as you time to ride. Yeah, the grass greener on the other side. Follow me, they'll eat you alive. Yeah, the grass greener on the other side. Hey. It started in the Philippines. Francis M. the killer bees. Till I was 13, spitting soliloquies on Dilla beats. Silly me for thinking these television imagery representing me when most these people never look like me. Red, white, and blue, Julie, blonde, white, and blue. I see my people when enlightened, but enlightenment's in you. Reflection of the use, deflection of the truth. Attention to the clues, we neck to neck and start to lose. How can we read B and B? POC was with the POC, was their POV when they see no me. They see you as a DOP, or better yet, a DOD. They hoping that you do or these statistics of the lottery. Playing yellow face, the other half of playing two-face. I feel the ain't use to my face up in this new place. New dreams to chase, too much baggage like my suitcase. Feeling out of place, so we got here on a Tuesday. The grass greener on the other side. Forget your dreams as you down to ride. The grass greener on the other side. Forget your dreams as you down to ride. The grass greener on the other side. follow me to eat you alive. Hey, the grass is greener on the other side, but now I'm feeling less around inside. We have one more song to share with you all this afternoon. Make some noise if you're enjoying the food. Make some noise if you're enjoying your time here at the National Immigrant Integration Conference 2021. Hey, hey, hey. Yeah, 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 hello, America. Break your backs for dollars, they don't carry ya. 7,000 miles away from home with language barriers. Land of opportunity, tell me, is it good to ya? But 6 feet deep on stolen land is where they bury in November 1991. Papa came here with the wife, 2 daughters, no money, but they wanted them a better life. Peace went to their name, so they're piecing up the pain. Ain't no peace in the position, it's an immigrant that's praying for a piece of that Americana pie for the cream. To a piece of dream they sold you, but it only was a dream. For a piece of mind to thinking that my mama could be seen as an equal, not a foreign immigrant or in between. I was a kid in the sky, nothing but dreams in her eyes, hoping that we would survive. But mama, those were the times. They telling us compromise, they always feed in the slides. Made to believe it don't exist unless I wear a disguise. Cause I've been constantly lied, too broken down till I cry, till I no longer recognize the person now it's inside. Until we fade with the sun, and we forget where we from. Then we self-hate till it's done, and never question it once. So mama, tell me we won, the person that I become. I have a soul for a tongue in the skin that shines and listening because the place that I'm from. Still in your sleep on my tongue, so every word from a lesson hold the weight of a ton if I'm ever slipping. I'm never looking down, I do this for myself, so the end I'll hold it down. And even when I'm sinking, I'm never looking down, I do this for myself, so the end I'll hold it down. Hey. Mama will make it in America. 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 Hey, mama will make it in America. Hey, mama will make it in America. Hey, mama will make it in America. Feeling homesick as we go. Mama's never really home, cause she working all alone. Living broke, we need a loan. Papa threatened mama's life. Papa left with no goodbye. Promise to myself beside him now will never make me cry. Now I'm thinking that I'm grown. All I wanna do is roam, running far away from home. In the crowd, I feel alone. Mama, she be working late, not to showing on her face. Too much pressure on her plate. I'm too selfish to relate. Until stay in your home, my kid darker cause you prone. Look into the mirror, oh, Filipino blood and bones. Question in my skin and toe like I should be embarrassed. Though wider skin the scene is gold. This is what we're always told. Mama said to learn the way. Every day you emulate till identity erased. Overcome by inner hate. Teacher said to hide my tongue. They don't understand me none. But my blood these over lungs too powerful. They like a gun. I'm correcting mama's words. I'm embarrassed when she slurs. What makes me better than her? This language wasn't her first. Ruby, can you get a grip? Find a balance. You might slip. Mom and dad need you quick. Stop thinking that you the 7,000 miles from home, but a million more to go. Gotta make it on my own. I can feel I'm getting close. 7,000 miles from home, but a million more to go. Gotta make it on my own. I can feel I'm getting close. Mama will make it in America. Hey, mama will make it in America. Hey, mama will make it in America. Hey, mama will make it in America. Mama will make it in America. Hey, mama will make it in America. Hey, mama will make it in America. Yeah. Mama will make it in America. Yeah, mama will make it in America. Hey, mama will make it in America. Yeah, mama will make it in America. Hey, mama will make it in America. Yeah, mama will make it in America. Hey, mama will make it in America. Hey, mama will make it in America. Hey, mama will make it in America. Yeah, mama will make it in America. Mama will make it in America. Mama will make it in America. Mama, I made it in America. Thank you so much once again. My name is Ruby Ybarra. Give it up for my DJ E.T. Thank you, everybody.
That mic, please. You can do better than that for Ruby Ybarra coming out to join us. She was incredible and said yes because she knows what a fierce and formidable group of human beings you are. So thank you so much for joining us, and we love you, Ruby. Thank you for joining us. Amazing. And while we're on the West Coast, you know, this year's NIC is hosted by states in the Mountain West and the West Coast. And one of our founding organizations is One America. And so the NPNA network has many leaders over the course of the last 3 years that have transitioned to their next roles. And our next guest in introducing one of our members of Congress is a new ED of One America. And so it's my pleasure to introduce for you today, Roxana Nourzi, Executive Director of One America, a host partner of this year's NIC.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Roxana.
Congresswoman, I'm just going to introduce you real quick. Hello, everyone. Nicole, thank you for the warm welcome. As the daughter of Iranian immigrants, it is such an honor to wake up every single day to lead One America, the largest immigrant rights organization in Washington state, and to fight for immigrant justice alongside all of you. And I'm particularly proud to lead One America because I'm following in the footsteps of my mentor, my inspiration, and the founder of our organization, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal. Yes, let's give it up for her. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal is someone from our movement. She actually was one of the founders of MPNA and started this conference, and has been someone who has consistently and unequivocally fought for immigrant rights in every position she's held. Congresswoman Jayapal is now serving her third term in Congress. She is the first South Asian woman elected to the U.S. House of Representatives and one of only 24 naturalized citizens currently serving in Congress. As a member of the House Judiciary Committee and chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, she's been a champion of immigrant communities, of worker rights to have a living wage, of LGBTQIA+ people, and of climate justice. Congresswoman Jayapal was one of the original co-sponsors of the New Deal for New Americans Act, which aims to transform the federal government's approach to immigrant inclusion by proactively investing in our communities and expanding access to citizenship and immigration legal services. And she has been a tireless advocate for addressing the racial inequities in the criminal justice system and decriminalizing immigration. And we are now relying on her to hold Congress and the White House accountable and ensure that our communities receive a permanent path to citizenship this year. Congresswoman wished that she could be with us all here today. She is a part of our community, but we do have her here virtually. So please welcome my mentor, our friend, our champion, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal.
Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Roxana, for that lovely introduction. I have been so proud to see you take the helm of leadership as executive director at One America, and to see all of the strategy, intelligence, and passion for organizing that you bring to this role. And to all of you, it is an honor, a true honor to be with you today. As a founding co-chair of NPNA with Gustavo Torres of CASA and Josh Hoyt, it has been just great to see the fantastic work that NPNA has done over the years and how critically important your voice will be to the debate going forward. I come to you today as the first Indian American Congresswoman elected to the House of Representatives and one of only 14 naturalized citizens in Congress. I am an organizer and activist by training, helping to found and lead One America for 12 years. And you may have seen some of my organizing work happen in the last few weeks in my role as chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, a 96-member strong caucus that put back on the table the Build Back Better Act, the majority of the president's agenda, including a path to citizenship for millions of immigrants, even as we were watching the attempts of corporate and special interests to kill that agenda and to only move the much smaller roads and bridges infrastructure bill. Well, let me tell you something. We will not allow that to happen. We will pass both bills and deliver them to the president's desk because we refuse to leave people behind. And this is the Democratic agenda, the agenda that we ran on and won the House, Senate, and White House on. So when we talk about the important work that NPNA is doing, this exact victory this past week of keeping immigration alive, green cards alive in the discussion right now is exactly what we mean when we say that when we are at the table as immigrants, we change the conversation. That we need immigrants and naturalized citizens in elected office so that we can fight for these policies, implement the kinds of smart policies that are needed to help build our America and to organize on the inside as well as the outside. And I want you to know that when I was in the Oval Office with the president last week, I ended my comments with why we are doing what we are doing and why it is so important. I told the president that I was just 16 years old when I came to the United States by myself to attend college. My parents sacrificed so much using all of their savings to send me here alone because they believed that this is where I would get the best education, have the most opportunity, the brightest future. And yeah, it took me 17 years and an alphabet soup of visas to get my citizenship. But I went from that 16-year-old girl with nothing in my pockets by myself in a strange new country to sitting across from the President of the United States in the Oval Office as the first and only South Asian American woman ever elected to the House, one of only 100 women of color ever elected to Congress since the founding of our country. And I told the president that I had the American dream, went to college, went to graduate school, created a new life for myself far away from what I knew. But that American dream is out of reach for too many people, and that cannot be. We have to make sure that we deliver the American dream to people across this country and to the immigrants who look at America and see hope, see justice, see a future. We have to protect our essential workers, putting their lives at risk and that of their families every day to keep all of us safe. We have to provide adequate worker protections, and we have to stop incarcerating and deporting immigrants who have been holding up this country for decades. And let's not forget, our lives in America are deeply linked to the state of the world, not just as we saw with COVID, knowing no geographical boundaries, but also as we look forward to the fact that 216 million people could be forced from their homes across the world due to climate change by 2050. So, my sisters, brothers, and siblings, this is our moment to deliver transformational change across movements with solidarity, with joy, with love, and with commitment to all of us. We have come together, immigrant, labor, and progressive movement, to successfully pass the American Dream and Promise Act out of the House twice. We have united around increasing the minimum wage and strengthening the rights of domestic workers in cities and states across the country. We are more powerful together, and I know that we can make the impossible possible when we fight together for citizenship for our communities, for action on climate, for a living wage, and so much more. So thank you for all you do to advance immigrant rights in our country. We make the road by walking, and I am so proud to walk with all of you to create a more just and equitable society for all of us.
Please give it up for Congresswoman Jayapal. Thank you so much for sending that address. She is a founder of NPNA, and so she's coming home virtually to be among family. Give it up. You all can do better than that. I know you just had the lunch lull. Our next speaker is a special guest that we've had in the making for the last 20 months since we first started planning the NIC. And, when we started with a framework last year of how we would bring about this conversation, we wanted to shift the narrative around immigrant inclusion from welcoming, from a transactional framework to more of a notion of belonging. And so the next guest is the director of Othering and Belonging Institute. He's a professor of law, African American ethnic studies at the University of California, Berkeley. He was the executive director of Kirwan Institute of the Study of Race and Ethnicity at Ohio, and he's a co-founder of Poverty and Race Research at Action Council. So it is my distinct pleasure this afternoon to introduce Professor John A. Powell for the first portion of today's plenary, Healing Our Way to Belonging.
Thank you for having me there virtually and actually accommodating my schedule. And I think some of your participants may know, I recently had an operation, was still planning on coming as late as yesterday, and my wonderful assistant basically said, don't get on the plane and call the folks at Nick and Cynthia, and you accommodated. So I owe you, but I love the work you're doing, want to be a part of it, and I think it's critical. So I'm going to talk a little bit about belonging and immigration, but also let me start by just talking about the earth. We sometimes talk about the commons, things that we share, and a number of writers are now saying what we have in common, of course, is the earth. We belong to the earth and the earth belongs to us, but not to be exploited, not to be extracted. And we don't treat it that way, especially in relationship to immigration. After Trump pulled out of the Paris Peace Accord, there was some Americans who basically said, you cannot affect our part of the world. We own part of the earth and you don't have any rights to that part of the earth. Immigration is actually an interesting and complicated issue. And it implicates so many other issues, and I don't have time to sort of go through it all, but I do want to highlight a couple. Most of us don't realize that the modern nation state is only 400 years old, actually less than 400 years old, developed in 1648. Before that, the dominant power in the world, the dominant way of organizing people was still some remnants of the Holy Roman Empire. And after a 30-year war, the European countries came up with a way of actually creating the modern nation state. Now, people have been moving forever. We all started out in Africa and have been migrating forever. But it's not just that people have been moving forever, it's that during that same time period, the European powers in particular embarked on a massive plan of colonialization, of extraction, of exploration, of domination for people all over the world. And even today, when we think about the way in which our economies are structured, we have a global economy. So we have resources, food, oil, chips, precious minerals from all over the world. And yet we're saying, while we want your stuff, or we need your stuff, people stay put. We're saying we have a global economy where money can flit all around the world, where goods and services can flit all around the world. We're saying people stay put. And that simply won't fly. That simply doesn't work. And as previous speakers noted, we also have a global pandemic that actually refused to stay put. We travel all over the world. We also have climate change, and no one country can actually address climate change. And so what we have is a situation where the world is becoming more and more integrated, and yet we're still building walls. We built more walls in the last 10 years than we had in the previous 50. So we're trying to stop some flow while we enhance others. We create a structural imbalance. And it's interesting, if you think about the EU, which is not perfect by any means, as they sort of liberalize their economy, they also liberalize the ability for people to move within the European Union. The United States and NAFTA did just the opposite. We liberalized trade and we created more stringent restrictions in terms of immigration. And so it's structurally problematic. And it's not just that it's basically saying people stay put, it's deeply racially encoded. I'm sure all of you know that one of the first laws passed by the new United States Congress in 1790 was the Immigration and Naturalization Act. And in this act, we were explicit. We said only free white people could be naturalized as immigrants in the United States. The practice was actually worse than that. We said free white people, but in fact, what we meant was free white men who were property owners. So we started describing a country that was extremely limited, even while we were in a country, in a place where we're taking land from Native Americans, or we're annexing land from Mexico, and while we're enslaving Black people. And so there's always been this contradiction in the United States. And the racially inscribed way of who can immigrate to the United States was not formally removed until 1952. And some of those practices continued well into the 1960s. And so what we're calling for is a recognition that we all belong, that the earth is common to all of us, not to white people, not to the United States, not to rich people. It belongs to all of us. And not just the earth, but the people of the earth, the things of the earth. So how do we actually begin to actually move in that direction? It's challenging because the very notion of the nation state, born a little less than 400 years ago, clashes with this concept. But so does globalization. That is, globalization clashed with the early expression of the nation state. So we're moving to something different. We're moving to a place where people can move, where we have cell phones, where we have information, where we have resources, where we have supply chains that are global. But we still are holding on to this archaic notion of the nation state. It wasn't natural. It wasn't inevitable. So what do I mean by belonging? Belonging is different than just being included. It means that people have an effective voice, that people have dignity, that people co-create the very thing they belong to. And so, as Cynthia suggested, it's more than just being welcome to America. It's saying, if you're here, you participate in creating the country, the world, the space, the community that you're part of. And this may seem strange, but it's not at all. Up until fairly recently, more than 40 states in the United States allow undocumented immigrants to vote in local and state elections. More than 40 states. When did that change? Well, that changed at the very time, particularly after the Civil War, when Blacks were being given the right to vote. And so somehow, again, it was racialized. So it wasn't just fear of any immigrant. It was fear of particular immigrants. The world is calling for something more radical, and the changes are inevitable. Most of the world will have a decline in population, and one of the few places which will have a large increase in population is Africa. And so if the world is not going to age out, we'll have to figure out a way to be more robustly integrated with Africa. So climate change, changing demographics, the changing economy, all call for a new, more radical way of thinking. And we're saying that way should be organized around belonging, that we care for each other. And instead of turning on each other, we turn toward each other. It won't be easy. You'll see right-wing people who are immersed in right-wing populism, who defines narrow we's, who insist that the country only belongs to either whites or Christians. But I think we are better than that. We're already past that. And it will be bumps and starts. But I know that together we can make this happen. How it happens is complicated. And I can't try to lay that out in the last couple of minutes I have. But I will say, I'm from the Bay Area. We live in a state, California, where there's no racial majority. You just heard from an incredible rapper who has Philippine origins. That's the Bay Area. California is not perfect, but it's thriving. So can we create a world where all belong and none are other? I think not only can we do that, we must do that. And one of the ways we do that is we expand the spheres, expands the places where people belong. So people belong everywhere, in their homes, in their schools, in their work, in their mosques, synagogues, churches. Create a space where people belong, and there are ways of doing that. And I'll just end by saying, in the 18th and 19th of this month, we're having a conference, and if you haven't registered, I invite you to register and continue this conversation. And again, my hats off to Nick for the incredible work you're doing. And my only regret is that I'm not there with you physically, but I hope in the near future I will be there with you. I am certainly there with you in spirit. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Powell. I hope that you are on the mend and have a speedy recovery. We wish you well from the room at Nick, and we look forward to you remaining a friend of Nick and NPNA as we continue these critical conversations. Thank you again for joining us. Please give another round of applause for Professor Powell. Thank you. Great. I would like to call the panelists for the next session, Solidarity and Focus, to the stage, and I'll introduce them as they come on up. These are some of the most brilliant narrative strategists, organizers, coalition builders, philanthropists in our community that are going to come up and share the ways that we can operationalize solidarity in our work. So I think it's timely, and this, of course, is the place of healing and belonging within the NIC that we wanted to be able to bring you this year. And I think we should name and be unafraid to say that our movement is at a critical point where our unity is more important than ever. And the role of the NIC is to bring all of these pieces together, from the immigrant advocacy community, from policymakers, government, philanthropy. And this is where the work begins with all of us in this room. So please join me in welcoming our next panelist to the stage. Jonathan Jays Green, Vice President of Programs at Marguerite Casey. Kika, oh, she's not joining us. Our sister Kika sends her regrets. She is not feeling well enough to travel. We have Janine Kamenot, Executive Director of the National Urban Indian Family Coalition. And Jeff Chang, Senior Advisor of Race Forward Butterfly Lab for Immigrant Narrative Strategy. And how could I forget our panelist, Sadie Sarr from Senegal, Le Pays de la Teranga. I know I probably butchered that, from the welcoming land. She's a Detroit resident, founder of African Bureau of Immigrant and Social Affairs, or ABISA. Please join me in welcoming Sadie Sarr to the stage. I was so excited for this conversation that I was moving too fast, but welcome everyone. So let's get to it. I think one of the things that I would love to first start with each of you and maybe give a little reaction to Professor Powell's remarks and what's working. What do you feel like is working right now in our work of building solidarity? I will start with you, Jonathan. I'll work my way this way.
Yeah, thank you so much for this conversation and for the professor for the framing. This framing of belonging it hit me a little bit hard. Like, I've heard him speak before. And I think what's on my heart in this moment is that at times it's felt like belonging is a luxury not afforded to Black people. At times it's felt like, like, I think this world, I'm used to this world offering me crumbs, and like, I should be grateful for the tiny things that it offers me. And like, this concept of belonging that the professor is offering just feels so expensive and luxurious, if I will. And I just wanted to say thank you for that. When I think about like what has been working, and I think about the longer arc of our movement, I can't help but think about like the moment when I joined the immigrant rights movement like 10 years ago and sort of who we were then versus who we are now. Thinking about, transphobia, anti-Blackness, homophobia, classism that at times I've experienced in our very own movement that like haven't always made me feel like I belong. And the work that incredible leaders who are on the stage and folks all across this room have done to force our movement to confront its shortcomings, to force our movement to have those difficult conversations and to go beyond those conversations. Because I feel like oftentimes it feels like the work of addressing all of these isms falls on those marginalized communities, right? And I work at the Margaret Casey Foundation, and we fundamentally believe that racial justice is not just like a part of our work, but it's actually central to a functioning democracy and an economy that represents all of our dreams and contributions. So to see people taking up causes of racial justice who like may not be Black, I think to me that's like an example of what is working and something that I want to continue to see and continue to lead, because that's what it looks like to lead in this moment.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Janine, I'm going to move to you next. We met last year when we were planning the NIC, and I don't know, how many of you joined NIC virtually last year? Okay, about 70% of you are new to NIC, so I was wondering if you were coming to check out your in-person experience. Janine Kominot lives in Seattle. She's an enrolled member of the Keynote Indian Nation, and you are a coalition just like us. You run the National Urban Indian Family Coalition, like NPNA, and you hold a lot of pieces of this work and really look at intersectionality. What do you think is working in operationalizing solidarity in your work?
Ooh, that's a really good question. So again, my name is Janine Kominot, and I'm a citizen of the Quinault Indian Nation. I'm also Oglala from Pine Ridge, South Dakota, and I'm also First Nations from Canada. So I'm Heshkwit and Quaggle from Vancouver Island, and I live in Seattle, which are the homelands of the Duwamish. And I'm sitting here on the stage in the homelands of the Paiute people. For us, you know, Professor Powell's talk was really reminiscent for me in the work that we do, because as American Indians, we do belong here. We are home. We've never not been home.
Period.
Period.
So, and I think that what the professor really talked about to me was really echoes a lot of Indigenous core cultural values, which is belonging. So we didn't build a wall when they came over on the Mayflower. We welcomed them. We without us, they didn't make it through that first winter. So a core cultural value for Indigenous people globally is belonging, is you are on the earth right now. And this earth is here to give back to you. And so that's central to our work in our coalition, because we work with urban American Indians all over the country. Here in Vegas, we're working with the Las Vegas Indian Center here, and I think Rulan gave the opening blessing. And so when you're in a city in America, it's often easy to sort of lose touch of the earth and sort of not know that 80% of the world's biodiversity is now on Indigenous land. That's our planet, that's our water, that's our earth, that's the air we breathe. And so for our people, it's a process of reclaiming who we have been and who we always will be. And the notion of building solidarity, to me, is the most important thing I think as humans we can do on this planet. I think if we don't do that, climate change, like the earth, it always comes back to the earth. We don't have air to breathe, if we don't have clean water, if these pipelines keep going up, it's all going to go to hell. And so I think this building solidarity between all of us is really important. And I'll end with, I think that there's a lot to be said for sharing of stories. I think that the immigrant story in America is really important. And it's important for us as American Indians to know too. So we are often not included in this dialogue about immigration to our country. And we never have been included in the dialogue about who comes to this land when it's our land. And so as far as I'm concerned, American Indians all over the country, we welcome you forever.
Thank you so much, Janine. We share a common funder, the Wallace H. Coulter Foundation, who, by the work that they have done and the vision for Suvan for us to build relationships with one another and mutually support our work, our coalition building, was the reason that we met and that we will continue to work together. And so I want to just lift up and honor the role that philanthropy has in fostering long-term collaborations. That takes courage, right, to take a risk to do that. I'm going to move to you, Jeff. Butterfly Lab for Immigrant and Narrative Strategy. You are the senior advisor at Race Forward as well. From your perspective in building narratives and integrating arts and culture into movement work, what do you think is effective?
There's so much to say. Maybe if I could just say how inspired I've been by Jonathan, Janine, and by Dr. Powell, and maybe start there as a way to get going. And please stop me, because I keep going forever. The older I get, the longer I go. Let me just say, for thinking about this narrative of solidarity in this moment, for myself, so sort of beyond my organizational affiliation and just, coming from how I identify as somebody of Chinese and Native Hawaiian descent. And I think that over the past 21 months maybe, the notion of solidarity has been very, very relevant to those of us who are racialized as Asian, as Pacific Islander, for obvious reasons, right? It's been a good moment to be able to affirm and re-educate folks about the fact that the notion even of Asian America, of Asians and Pacific Islanders together is an act of solidarity, that people came together in the 1960s, inspired by the Black Power movement, inspired by the American Indian movement, inspired by the Chicano Power movement, thinking about what it would mean to actually tell a shared story, right? To find that shared story. And I think what all of you have been making me think in this particular moment is that that's absolutely the thing that we ought to be thinking about as a movement moving forward, right? That the way forward is not just for justice for migrants and immigrants, it's for justice for all. And that a solidarity narrative is rooted in mutuality. And that's not transactional. That's not the kind of thing of like, oh my gosh, there's this huge increase in violence against us as Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. Can you give me some solidarity right now? It's not like that at all, right? We've recognized that it's about mutuality, and it's about thinking about what our shared future should look like, right? And so there have been moments in this, in these past 20 months that have been very difficult, right? The narrative of anti-Asian violence as it's sort of evolved, especially in 2021, has been about media that points the finger at Black perpetrators. Let's just put it out there, right? And be honest, right? And so we've had to really address anti-Blackness in the Asian American and Pacific Islander communities in this particular moment. Because solidarity, again, is not about transactional. It's about mutuality. It's about finding that shared story. If we don't move towards solidarity that respects, understands, and takes lead from folks who are fighting for Black futures, Indigenous futures, we have a solidarity that's going nowhere, that's going to go backwards. And I think that that's part of what we have to recognize in this particular moment. So it's about recognizing the interdependence that we have on each other. It's about recognizing that we need to address anti-Blackness and settler colonialism in our migrant justice and immigrant justice movements, not just now, but forever. Otherwise, we're going to be heading the wrong direction.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jeff. Sadie, it's been just such an intense 24 hours. And I just thank you for joining us here and that you are willing to come on and speak to this moment and what even we're feeling at this NIC as we're working toward finding a place of belonging for everyone.
Thank you so much. I think something that the professor said was that we belong to the earth. And it made me smile because civilization started on the continent in Africa. So if we belong to the earth, civilization belongs to us as African folks. And that's where we started, and society belongs then to that community and that society. And belonging today, modern day, is belonging begin with us. But the question is, who is us? Where do us start? Who define us? And who also hold those or draw those boundaries of what us means? And unless we decide that us is not my mom and dad who speaks Wolof and pray the same way and eat the same food, then we are not moving towards belonging. We are making sure that we continue to other the one that don't look like me. And the conversation we are having is hard because we were said it was okay to other the other folks. I'm sitting here not as an African American descendant of slave, but I'm sitting here carrying multiple identities. And my ancestors were the one who was snatched and brought into this land that was not theirs. And they had to survive. And the survivors became the forefathers of the African American brothers and sisters who radically have changed the world we live in by radically putting their body in the line and pushing society in this country to recognize their humanity. So organizing is radical. What should not be is having Black bodies today continue to radically put their bodies in line and in harm's way to remind us that we have to redefine what us means. I also sit here as an African immigrant who have just spent the last 18 years in the United States and having to navigate the United States social taxonomy. Because when I grew up in Senegal, I was just Sadie, the sister of Felwin, the daughter of so-and-so. I plain Black in America. And I had to take on that identity and understand the hurts, the pain, the beauty, the joy of what does it mean to be Black. Then, the last 24 hours, like you said, was very tense because we walked into this space and part of who we are, of the other multiple identities that we carry, felt in harm's way and did not feel welcoming. And Mr. Powell just told us that welcoming was already a problem. So if they did not even feel welcomed, then where do they belong? And that's the conversation that as an organization, as organizers that are pushing the United States society to see us, to recognize us, to give us the value and to recognize our humanity, that we need to step into those waters. They might be muddy, they might be painful, and understand that we cannot move forward unless what we say to this organization, to say to this government, we do ourselves. Which means if we are going to do this work, we have to start by the ones who are the most impacted. Let us not just name anti-Blackness. we have to be about dismantling and being intentional of how we don't forgetfully, with good intention, perpetuate the harms. And I'm saying this because I want my brothers and sisters who sat in the stage here yesterday, but the one who also sat in the back and watched it happen in fear, to feel validated. I don't want them to walk around and say, was that the behavior I'm supposed to have because somebody else in their table felt like it was a bit radical, to hold Nick accountable. We are organizers. If we are afraid of being radical, then we're afraid of change. And because belonging begins with us, let's make sure that we wrap our hands around ourselves, around our brothers and sisters. And my brother and sister is not the one that look like me. My brother and sister is right here, right here. They don't look like who I am.
It's so powerful. And the way that, the work, like you said, Seti, is messy, and it requires us to get into new territories. And I think over the years, the NIC has really become a place where we can do that. And on behalf of the entire movement, immigrant and refugee advocacy field. So I thank you, because change is possible. And I think as we expand the NIC, that we continue to include and make sure that belonging is central for every community that would like to come to NIC. So I welcome that. Jonathan, I'm going to start again over here. I see I'm looking at you.
I feel like you should start with Sadie this time.
I am. I think the question I have is, if we imagined, a narrative shift. There's over the years been a narrative around immigrant integration. We shift to inclusion. Now we're talking about belonging as a movement and as a space, which is so universal and so centered in personhood. I wonder how you react to the narratives, and how is this working or not working in the context of the current fight? I know, the recent events of the last 2 weeks, where we had, the Haitian expulsion, and you contrast that to welcome of other members of community, of course, who were mobilized in one of the greatest resettlements of our time. I think we had to challenge ourselves in that moment. And so I'd love for you to just offer a few reflections about what these moments really demonstrate to us about narrative.
It's such a hard question. Again, I keep going back to this 10-year arc that I've been lucky to be a part of this movement, and thinking about even the usage of the word dreamer, right? That when I was in high school, that's the way that we were oh, we are all dreamers, and we were going hard with it until we started to have an awakening about what it means to utilize that term in service of pushing forward a political agenda that made people like me, who are undocumented and young, innocent and worthy of protection, at the expense and the criminalization of my parents and other people who don't fit into that label. And there's been a lot of people who've been here who've led that conversation over the past year, criticizing the tropes of the good and bad immigrants, and work of organizations like Sadie and Black, so many other organizations that have really contributed to that narrative. And what's been what has been so hard for me over the past couple of weeks, watching the pictures of Haitian migrants being whipped by CBP agents on horses at Del Rio. And I want to give a shout out to Gerline and Haitian Bridge Alliance, who've been doing incredible work at the border. I don't know where Gerline is. Girl, I love you. But to see that, and this might be controversial, but to see that and break down at the same time that we're talking about the reconciliation, and the potential legalization of some of us by the same administration. I can't even speak. Just so like the culmination of everything we've been talking about. The fact that this administration and some consultants and strategists can think that if they just legalize a small sliver of us, they can get away with whipping my people at the border. And if they think that because some of us will benefit, that the rest of us are going to be quiet, they are sorely mistaken. And this is why the language we use is so important. Because we've made undocumented young people like myself as like the only sanitized portion of our community where people in power think that if they just throw a bone, a crumb to us, they can continue to perpetrate the same attacks that presidents from all the other, like from the other party would do. I'm sorry,
Oh, this is a real conversation. Oh.
The question that I want to ask all of us today is, where does that leave us? What are we gonna do? I know what Gerline is doing at the border. I know what other Black immigrant organizations are doing right now. But what are we going to collectively do to address this political calculus that people have planned and executed so beautifully according to their eyes and so terribly according to those of us who believe in freedom and justice? Right. And how are we going to address this harm? Like, that's the conversation I want to have, right? Like, I am clear that there is no green card shiny enough for me to cash in and say that my parents deserve to be punished and deported. Oh, no. That's not a trade I'm willing to make. Right. And I'm still not sure that we as a movement share that same belief. So that's why we need to have these conversations. That's it.
That's exactly why we need to have these conversations. Sadie, I see you're ready to react and ready. I think you have a lot to say here. What would you reflect on what Jonathan just shared?
What I'm gonna add is, the notion of those. I'm not those organizers. I'm not those communities.
Come on.
I sit here, my cousin crossed the desert, was enslaved in Libya. Then we paid for his freedom. Then he got on a boat regardless and tried to make it to Europe. He made it to Spain and ended up in a concentration camp, but however they call it. My cousin's sister is a well-known author, flown from one university to another in France, and she speaks so well, so eloquent, so. That's the elder sister. The brother is still in cage and detention. Well, he knows how to sew, he knows how to lay bricks, he is a manual worker. But we accepted that the spaces that we are, they decide who is deserving and who is not deserving based on what they believe you bring to the conversation. So I might be that immigrant that is the model minority or that have all these degrees, then I am enough to be tokenized and so on and so forth, so it was okay. And the other one who have a thick tongue, a thick accent, whose clothes are loud, the colors are popping, doesn't fit in this dress of polished society, is not deserving. I went to the border with Ghislaine, and at the time, 4,000 Haitians had already made it there, 2016, you guys. And when we drive in too deep into Tijuana, powdered, salt, dust, and all of that, my people are there. And I'm like, oh, wait, I can speak French for all these people. Then I'm talking of these young girls, 18, 15, 12, and none of them speak French. They have been out of Haiti for so long because the cross of the 11-country journey, they speak Spanish, and I'm sitting there like, damn, I cannot even speak with them. However, they don't belong in Tijuana because Tijuana police in Mexico and everybody is making sure they know that they're too black to belong there. And we at the border cannot let them in because we have a metering system and they don't belong to being able to get that metering system. That was 2016. So for a lot of us, what we have seen at the border last week was not new, it was coming in. But we accepted that happened. Because we accepted at the time to center only the youth of Central America as being the one that needed to be saved. And our establishment and Congress followed suit when they tried to shut the camp because they could not bear to hear the cries of those children calling for their mom. But we were okay to hear the cries of Black children that have been years and years separated from their parents in the name of anything, in the name of the drug for war, in the name of the drug for poverty, in the name of slavery. So we have been conditioned to accept that. So we are accepting today what is happening at the border. And that man did not have a whip. It was just, however they call it, the les rênes du chevaux. We explained that. And there was no outpour in the street because George Floyd got justice. Be comfortable. I have not seen nobody out there. And that's what we have to address our children of immigrants ourselves, immigrants, parents of American children, and everybody in this room today. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you. Well, I still have Professor Powell here. I would love to have you weigh in if you can hear us okay around how this conversation is. What are some thoughts as you're hearing these incredible leaders speak?
Well, first of all, one, just that they're incredible, and I'm glad to be able to learn from their wisdom. A couple of things I want to point out. One, the difference between immigrant and refugees. And in 1951, the UN created a convention on refugees. Refugees supposedly have a different set of rights than immigrants. The United States didn't sign that convention in 1951, and that was largely about Jewish refugees still fleeing from what had happened there. But the United States didn't sign it because the United States was still stuck in a deep kind of anti-McCarthy and racism, and it didn't sign the protocol until 1967. And we've written a piece basically saying that people who are being displaced by climate should be covered under the 1951 and 1967 protocol. And then Haiti, it actually, like the brother who spoke, it really upsets me for a lot of reasons. Just, and I won't go into all of it, but I recently testified at the Reparations Committee for California. When I was thinking about it, reparations, Haiti was forced to pay reparations to France from the time that it pushed France out until the 1950s. Haiti, which was enslaved and colonized by France, when it pushed the colonial powers out, the West and made Haiti pay France. We have actually, the way we have treated Haitians and Haiti is just, it's upsetting. And a lot of it has to do with racism. And so I lived in Miami when we were welcoming Cuban refugees and we were locking up Haitian refugees. And I've just seen this play out over and over again. And so I think, I appreciate the brother raising that. It's just that, yes, sometimes even when we have a crack, we'll say, as the sister said, these people belong, this is part of us, those are not. And unfortunately, much too often it's color-coded. So Trump said he was willing to accept immigrants from Norway, but not from the Middle East or Africa. So I think we have to confront that. We have to confront it here in the United States, but also in our immigration policy. And a lot of us have some relationship with the Biden administration. We have to really be diligent and not let that slide.
Thank you, Professor Powell. I'm going to pivot us to the narratives that we have moving now. Jeff, I'm going to, maybe you could highlight what you learned from some of the work you did on Immigrants Are Essential and some of the other narrative work that so much of our movement has used over the last year and plus to be able to help us think bigger about putting a face and humanizing immigrants in our community.
Sure. We've had the luxury over the last 16 months of being able to conduct a lot of experimentation within the Butterfly Lab for Immigrant Narrative Strategy. And one of the things, and this actually goes to something that you're raising, Jonathan, which is that we actually have very little narrative infrastructure in our movement. And so we actually need to build rapid response and policy forward sort of campaign infrastructures at the same time that we need to be able to align this with thinking long term. And a lot of times what happens is we actually let the pace be dictated to us by current events, and we're improvising in the moment. And so I don't blame anybody. You're bringing up the Dreamers example, right? This was done within the context of trying to get a bill passed. But narrative work exceeds all of this type of work, right? Narrative work should actually exceed our policy business, our campaign business. We have to be able to align our messaging in the moment with thinking about where we want to go in the long run. And I think this is where we go to what Dr. Powell is bringing us towards, which is a shared story, right? What is a shared story? We need to be able to build up from our messages to our stories, to our narratives, to what we call deep narratives, right? We want to be able to take people in a particular direction that changes their worldview in the long run, right? Can we imagine a world, as Dr. Powell put it, where everyone belongs and no one is othered, right? Can we imagine a world in which borders are not even a thing? And we all go, wow, like we can't think about that in the moment that we're in. But we've got to be able to think about things over the long run and in the short run and everything in between. So part of what we've been able to do in the lab is to be able to test these different types of projects in which people can work on narratives in the moment that actually point us in the direction that we want to go in the long run, right? Marriage equality is the example that we end up using all the time. And what people did there was they pivoted from saying LGBTQ folks deserve these rights to love is love. Now, who's going to disagree with love is love, right? Who's going to disagree with that? We went from being 2/3 against marriage equality to being 2/3 for marriage equality across the generations, and like 80% for folks, in the younger generations. That's what we have to be thinking about, y'all, is thinking about the long run. What are the deep narratives, what are the values? Interdependence, abundance, right? Safety, right? The freedom to thrive, belonging, right? These are the types of values that we want to be able to move people towards in the long run. And that's what we have to think about as we do our work in narrative.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think I'm going to send it to you, Jonathan, and then I want to wrap with Janine, just because we are running on time and folks will come grab us over this.
Very quickly.
Yeah.
Jeff, I'm really curious about what it looks like. And I think you're right that we need to build a narrative infrastructure, a stronger narrative infrastructure to a movement. I also feel like at the same time, there is work to be done to build that support for folks who are on the margins, right? I think part of the problem is that some of the narrative that has been built has been to sort of push for like a mainstream agenda, right? So like thinking about marriage equality as an example, which has been really fantastic. And as a queer person, I'm happy to hear it. And also thinking about trans folks who are like still dying and being murdered on the street. Like, where is the narrative infrastructure for like folks who are at the margins, you know?
Right. Yes, absolutely. And so this is the opportunity that we have as we're building the infrastructure to be able to center the folks who are being harmed the most. Right. I think that that's the absolute opportunity that we're able to have. If we're able to actually look at this inside out, from where we want to be to where we're at now, as opposed to where we're at now to where we want to be, right? Then we actually have a chance to be able to build something that gets us there in the long run, I think.
Yeah.
That's the hypothesis, right? That's for the funders to fund us and the donors to fund us and for us to be able to build, right? But I think, yes, ultimately it's about that shared story. And so the challenge is how do we think beyond the silos that we've been put in, right? As migrants, as immigrants, as Asian American Pacific Islanders, how do we think beyond that into thinking about folks who are thinking about futures for all of us, right? And we have to be able to emerge from our individualized stories into the shared story of our future.
Thank you, Jeff. And Janine, you get the last word on coalition building and alliance building. I mean, for Indigenous communities to be here with us at NIC is significant for the last 2 years. And, permanently want to make sure that communities, Indigenous communities, wherever we go as NIC, are included and, that our alliance continues to blossom and build. So tell me what comes to mind.
I would say that, as I'm learning a lot, just FYI, it's fascinating because this isn't something that again, like I said before, we're not generally included in these conversations. So we, as American Indians, we're not really aware of what's going on within immigrant rights and stuff. And we should be, just as an FYI. I think for us, as we move forward and we begin to build coalition and we begin to build solidarity with one another, and again, I think that is the answer to everything. Solidarity is the answer to everything. Narrative change is the answer to everything. And I think we don't do that unless we take the time to learn each other's stories. If I walk into a room and you walk into a room and I walk out of that room, I want to be able to trust that you can tell my story in my absence. I want you to be able to know that I could tell your story with me gone. So I think that those types of relationship buildings, and again, relationships is a core Indigenous cultural value. We base everything on relationship to each other, relationship to the earth, relationship within ourselves. So I think, to end, I think that this solidarity piece is really important. And I think that knowing the history of the United States, the real history, not, a lot of folks come into the country and you're never going to hear about the Indigenous experience. You're never going to hear about genocide. That's a word that's not said. It is America's original sin. It's what happened. It's why we're all here. And we're still here. And I think that as we begin these narratives, being really honest about who America is, what the hope that America can bring, but also to be realistic that it's not based on the best thing in the world. And so now it's up to us to take that and change it. And I'll just leave it at that. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I know we're at time. This is an amazing conversation. I thank each of you for joining us for this. We will heal our way to belonging together at the NIC. And I hope that these conversations continue throughout the field. Thank you for your courage to have this conversation together today. Please give it up for our wonderful, amazing panelists. Our movement is powerful and it's full of love, and we can never forget that, and we have to ground ourselves in that. Our next speaker is a new ED from the NPNA network. He's here to introduce one of our champions of NPNA and of our work on immigrant inclusion. He recently took over at the helm of the New York Immigrant Coalition, and it's my pleasure today to introduce Murad Awadeh from New York.
Let's give it up for the last panel that just spoke. They're still here, so let's give them a really huge round of applause for that amazing delivery. The best conversations are the ones where they're tough, and we have to have these conversations, and if we don't, then we're not doing our communities justice. My name is Murad Awadeh. First and foremost, assalamu alaikum. For those who don't know what that means, it means peace and blessings onto you. My name is Murad Awadeh. I am the executive director of the New York Immigration Coalition. Is New York in the house? Someone said someone loves me. Thank you. Brooklyn loves me as a son of Brooklyn. I'm also the co-chair of the Fair Immigration Reform Movement. Is Firm in the house today? Firm, that was weak. Do it again. Is Firm in the house today? Even better. And I'm proud to be an executive committee member of the National Partnership for New Americans. Today, I have the honor of introducing someone who I personally consider a friend in this movement, someone who I don't see as an ally, but as an accomplice, someone who has stood with our community when it's not easy to stand with us, someone who has bucked her party to make sure that we were represented. Up next, I have the honor of introducing Congresswoman Grace Meng, serving her 5th term as representative of the 6th Congressional District of New York, encompassing different parts of Queens. Congresswoman Meng is a first-generation American whose parents are originally from Taiwan. She's the first and only Asian American member of Congress from New York State, and the first female Congress member from Queens since former presidential nominee Geraldine Ferrero, serving on the powerful House Appropriations Committee. She has been a tireless advocate for responding to anti-Asian American and Pacific Islander hate in a strong and unified manner, giving COVID-19 relief for all, regardless of immigration status, and ensuring that our young people have access to high-quality, affordable, and free education, as well as climate and economic justice. And of course, she has been one of the most overzealous advocates for immigrants and refugees as the sponsor of the New Deal for New Americans Act, a leader in establishing in working to establish the National Office of New Americans, and expanding access to citizenship for all, regardless of class or wealth, and investing in our communities. Join me in welcoming our champion, Congresswoman Meng.
Thank you so much, Murad, for the kind introduction. I don't think I have to tell you that without Murad and the NYIC team, and many of you in that room today, there would be so many people, our fellow Americans, who would not have received any assistance over this last year and a half as our country continues to come out of COVID. So I'm really thankful to his team and to so many of you, to Nicole, to the whole NPNA family, for organizing this conference and inviting me here to be with all of you today. I don't have to tell you that immigrants are the lifeblood of our country, and our nation is stronger when we embrace and assist immigrants in their transition as they contribute to our economies and culture. America is the nation it is today because of the contributions made by immigrants. To build on this history, I'm fighting to ensure that our policies uplift and protect the diversity that defines who we are as Americans and who we will become. As Murad said, I'm so thankful to NPNA's leadership for our New Deal for New Americans Act to establish critical assistance programs for immigrants and refugees to overcome common challenges as they journey to become new Americans. This past year and a half has been especially tough. We thought the previous 4 years under the former president was tough, but this past year and a half has also been really tough. We have seen how COVID-19 and this pandemic has shown a light on who we as a country and as a government prioritize as being American enough, who is good enough to be helped by our government programs, and the so many that we left out. We've talked about Build Back Better for quite a while now, but that means including more people than before. And I want to just acknowledge one of your previous speakers, my Progressive Caucus chairwoman, a friend and ally to all of you, Congresswoman and Chairwoman Pramila Jayapal. You have seen her heroic leadership on camera, but I have had the privilege of watching her behind the scenes too. And I'm just so thankful of the great works that she has done to advocate for all Americans. And I want to thank all of you, because it's leaders like Pramila, it's leaders like every one of you who have helped change the way that I have governed and how I've represented my community, whether it's in Queens, New York, or our shared communities across the country. Because of all of you, you've made me stand prouder to be an Asian American, to make me fully realize and to make our country realize that we are just as American as everyone else. You've made me proud to be a daughter of immigrants and know that every single person, unless you're a Native American, that we are all immigrants and we are all Americans. But we have seen throughout this last year and a half or two, as we started with the pandemic, we have seen how this country has prioritized certain people and have left out certain people. And we saw this with the legislation passed by Congress, because we weren't able to pass enough legislation to get enough resources to help people, every single person who needed help. We checked if they had papers and status. We don't check their status when we ask them to pay taxes. We don't check their papers when we're asking for them to provide essential services for us, from our transportation to delivering food to making sure that we are kept healthy and alive. We don't ask for papers then, but when it comes time to giving out programs and resources from the government, we're very good at narrowing that down and deciding who we think are eligible enough and good enough to get these resources. But the reality is government didn't do enough of a good job, and we left too many people out, and many of those were immigrants. And it's because of your leadership in this room, many of your organizations, groups in New York like the Asian American Federation, NYIC, Make the Road, who created programs and provided resources for our constituents that they were able to receive a single penny to help them as they came through this pandemic. We watched how our government prioritized who was good enough when we were rescuing people from Afghanistan. We are still watching as our government decides who's good enough to rescue after all the people of Haiti have been through this past year. And now as they have overcome this earthquake, we're not even letting them apply for asylum. We have to end Title 42. We have to treat them legally and to allow them to apply for the programs that they are legally entitled to apply for. And I also want to say something as an Asian American. In this last year and a half, the Asian American community went through so much trauma, suffering from discrimination, bias, and even murders. But so many other communities were there for us. Native American, LGBTQ, Latino, the Black communities. Now, as we watch what our Haitian brothers and sisters are going through, our Asian community needs to be there for them too, whether that's in New York or across the country. And the earlier panel talked about solidarity, and that's what we need to continue to practice. We're not good enough at solidarity. So we have to do it better to make sure that we are saving more lives. We saw recent flooding here in New York and throughout the country. 6 people in my district died, mostly immigrants living in basements, drowned while they were trying to escape. We saw again how they've been treated inequitably because of their status. And now, as we continue to fight for equitable legislation, infrastructure, building back better, we're not going anywhere until immigrants are included in these packages. Because building back better means including more people and helping more people than we did before, and means not leaving anyone behind. We all talk about the pandemic and how we have to build back better from what our states and country was the day before the pandemic. But we can't do that if we leave people behind. And we certainly will not leave our immigrant families behind. So I come to you today, not just as a congresswoman, but as a daughter of immigrants, to say thank you for the incredible work that you are all doing for our communities. Thank you for doing your work, and thank you literally for saving lives. Have a great conference.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Meng. You are a true champion, and we just appreciate all of your efforts on New Deal, on trying to establish the Office of New Americans, and encourage infrastructure from federal government all the way across all levels of government. Thank you again for joining us. We're running about 2 minutes behind schedule here, but I want to remind everyone of our special session that we've added to today's agenda. It's a conversation, it's a special session, a conversation on detention and global anti-Blackness that will be in Ballroom D. We invite all of you to join us there. Before we exit the room, I would like to recognize a couple delegations in the room. Is Refugee Congress in the house? I can't hear you. Refugee Congress in the house? We Are All America. Where are you? New American Youth Leaders Council? I think they were here on Sunday, so they had to get back to school. And last but not least, we want to recognize all of the New American elected officials here with us. Will you please stand? We are counting on you to lead our state legislatures, to lead our work forward, to be like Representative Jayapal and Meng, to be our champions. One of our very own is with us, who became a state senator in Oregon this year, former NPNA board member, Casey Jama. Where are you? Want to recognize you, one of our own. We know you're going to do incredible things. Please find a moment to speak him. We have 3 members of local government from Florida who are Haitian American. Dr. Alex Dislon, council member and vice mayor of the city of Miami. Where are you? Still here? Shout out. We have State Representative Dodie Joseph, and Representative Vanessa Joseph, as well as Tram Nguyen from Massachusetts. So welcome all of you. You are our leaders. I also don't want to forget New American leaders that are in the room. I'm an alumni. I know several other of you are alumni as well. Where is Nell? There's one person back there still in the room. All right, so thank you so much. We hope you have great sessions, and we'll see you back here for the closing plenary.